Hello, it's Matt Linklater here, and welcome to Link Biz Solutions. And cash flow is king. No matter in your business or in your household, maximizing cash flow is the number one thing that we strive to do. It's the number one causer of stress, and it's the number one causer of satisfaction. It's in business that we've taken the risks that we have in our business is because we want to create more cash flow and provide more value. In our household, it's the reason that we want to live a better life, create more experiences for ourselves and our kids, no matter what that is you need to maximize cash flow. And so Link Biz Solutions, our main strategy is how do you maximize your cash flow? Have you ever heard of what a family office is? A family office is reserved for people who have a net worth north of 50 million or even 100 million. But people like Bezos, Gates, and Buffett, they create a family office. And really what it is they employ the triangle of wealth: CPAs, tax attorneys, and financial advisors. And why do they do this? To maximize their cash flow. Everything is about cash flow. So this triangle of wealth makes sure that they're paying the legal amount in taxes, they're paying the least amount in interest, and paying the least amount in fees for all their investments. Why? Because when they do that, when they can increase the cash flow of all their strategies, all their investments, all their businesses, and their households, that's when you create ultimate wealth. And so what we've taken is the family office concept and made it into a multi-family office where we work with different families, different businesses who are higher income and higher net worth to help them employ the triangle of wealth so we can maximize their cash flow. One of the first things that we have to understand is what is cash flow. For our business partners to be on the same page, our spouses to be on the same page, we have to start speaking the same language. And so what is cash flow? Cash flow is the total amount of money being transferred into and out of a business household, especially as affecting liquidity. And so as business owners and business partners and as spouses, we all need to understand what is that cash flow, what kind of liquidity do we want, and that is what the cash flow is king process takes you through, is understanding liquidity and how to maximize liquidity but still live and grow the business and still experience the things you want in your life and in your household. But how do you maximize cash flow? How do you maximize liquidity? And how do you maximize your success? Over my career, I've had many business successes and many business failures. And the number one stress for me is cash flow management. See, I used to work in the corporate world and I didn't have somebody outside of what I was currently doing to help me manage my cash flow as I was out there raising money for large insurance companies. And then as I went in and I became a housing entrepreneur, if you will, a real estate entrepreneur, my biggest stresses were managing cash flow. The hard part is how do you manage cash flow and then do all the business activities that you do? See, we find some people are great at hunting down business, some people are great at delivering business, but who's managing the cash flow? And so really, I designed this cash flow is king type process to fix my own issues and my own problems, because I knew that doing the small things is what makes you successful in business. So when I Googled what is the number one cause of business failure, the result is inadequate or non-existent planning and inefficient decision making. The most common reason for business to underperform or fail are as follows: poor cash flow management. How do you maximize your cash flow in your business each and every day, each and every year? And how do you make sure that you're meeting those goals and that you're measuring them successfully? It has often been remarked that the number one cause of divorce, and when I Google the number one cause of divorce, it is cash flow. But even more than cash flow, it's communication about money. See, I know all the time in the past, when my wife and I would communicate about money, it'd become a stressful conversation. And the reason it was become stressful is because we didn't have a baseline understanding of what cash flow meant and what we were trying to do ultimately with our cash flow and our savings. And although we had clear-cut goals, what happened was we did not have the piece of paper of our household profit and loss, or income statement, if you will, so we could have a baseline for that conversation. And so when you're talking numbers too much in a relationship, it becomes about esoteric numbers, where what I find is most people can't hold a lot of numbers in their head, and it's hard to think logically through numbers when they're not in front of you. And so one thing that we did to make sure that we can maximize your communication and maximize your cash flow and maximize your communication around cash flow and money is we had to start understanding what is the income sheet of the household. What is the money coming in and the money going out, and where's that money going? And I'm going to take you through our Cash Flow is King process. We take you through the processes behind maximizing that communication, maximizing your cash flow, and therefore maximizing the results that you're seeing in your business and in your household, because ultimately that's where the money's going to go and to provide a better life for your family. And so maximizing your cash flow is really about maximizing your communication with your significant other. Let me share with you the biggest problems that people have with their cash flow, whether this is in their business or in their personal life. Is number one, they don't know their numbers. Literally, business owners do not know their numbers. They cannot produce an income sheet, a balance sheet, profit and loss. They cannot produce it on demand, typically. And even two CPAs that I was going to buy last year, they could not produce their numbers. They took over 6 months to produce accurate numbers on their business. This is bizarre. This is their CPA. This is not uncommon. Your CPA is operating this way. And so this is what happened. So I was buying two CPA firms. They couldn't produce their numbers. They took up to 6 months to produce their numbers. The one CPA wanted more money for his business, but his numbers did not allow for it. He did not understand how his numbers should break down. So not only did he not know his numbers, he didn't know how to interpret his numbers. Let me explain. On $1 million in revenue, a CPA office should boil down to 33% overhead, 33% employee costs, and 33% to the owner. Now, his employee costs were 48%. When I brought this to his attention, he said, well, I need those employees to deliver the services that I deliver. And I did not disagree with him. However, he was not delivering enough value to his clients. How could he deliver more value to his clients that he earned more money per client, and therefore his employee cost per client went down to service those employees? So by knowing your numbers, it's how do you interpret them? So for him, he needed to cross-sell and upsell his clients, provide more value, or increase his fees. All the above. The only way you increase your fees is by providing more value. The only way you cross-sell and upsell is by solving a client's problems. So he did not know his numbers and didn't understand how to interpret them, and it drastically cost, one, the amount of money he was bringing over to his family, and I know he was working hard, and number two, it cost him by not understanding the value of his business. Number two, fixed and variable expenditures. So we all have fixed expenditures that are not going to change. Our rent, our utilities, whether that be in business or our personal lives, our employee costs, our equipment costs, whatever that may be, we have fixed expenditures. But we also have variable spending. What if the HVAC goes down? What if we need to patch our roof? A family down the street had to patch the roof or redo a roof during Christmas time, $5,000. You know, that's a tough hit. But how do you plan for it? I remember one time when I worked in the corporate world, I had a $5,000 transmission problem on my car. So how do you plan for those types of things? They're going to happen. So how do you put them in your cash flows, and how do you put them into your budget? Because typically we know what we are maybe on a weekly or monthly basis, but we don't plan for those variable spendings. And guess what? They sting. The other thing is emotional spending. You know, I think you should spend your money. But the other day I was out and I was congratulating a guy or noticing a guy who had a Breitling watch, $10,000 watch. Very cool. He should have a $10,000 watch. But as soon as I congratulated him, he went into buyer's remorse mode. He started defending his purchase and his emotional spending. See, I think you should have emotional spending. You should buy 10 watches. I don't know what you can afford. You should get whatever you want. However, you should not feel bad about your purchase. So if you want a nice $10,000 watch one time a year, and you're buying 3 and you feel bad about 2 of them, well, let's figure out your cash flow. Let's figure out your emotional spending. And here's the deal. If you don't know where you're spending, you can't make better decisions. It's just plain emotional. But then when you put some logic and you put some baseline numbers to it, you can start controlling that emotional spending and decide where you want to spend that money. See, you know, I talk about this, my wife, you know, she has some variable spending every month, but she deserves it. She's in a job that requires her to look and act a certain way, and that takes time. That takes some investment in herself, and that is some variable spending that we needed to understand. And so when I showed it to her, we understood it, and she still does it. But by understanding it, we can understand that it's an investment rather than variable or emotional spending, and we have baseline numbers, and we can make better decisions. Lastly is really no plan. Most people just have no plan for their spending. And when you have that baseline numbers and you have that plan, and you have what I'm going to share with you, when you have those goals, when you have what gets measured gets done, and you reverse engineer and you have those actionable increments, then you can understand and wrap your head around emotional spending, variable spending. You can know your numbers, and you can make better decisions. So what kind of results do we see with our cash flow is king process? Well, it's not unlikely for us to uncover $500 to $1,500 per month plus. That's $6,000 to $18,000 a year that we can put back into your pocket, whether that's back into your business or back into your household. So in businesses, our minimum strategy usually puts about that $6,000 to $18,000 back into the business. I've seen this number as high as $65,000 for somebody making $600,000 in pre-tax profit, and I've seen this number as high as $1 million for people making $13 million a year. So putting money back in your pocket is key. And then when you look at your household, just this year, I can tell you what I put back into my household. We put back about $2,000 a month in cash flow. How do we do this? By re-looking at our debt and understanding where our debt payments were going, because we do have debt like everybody does in business and or their household. We like using other people's money for a lot of stuff. That is the key to maximizing your wealth in business. So when you use other people's money and you have debt, is how do you efficiently pay off that debt in a way that maximizes your cash flow? And then how are you efficiently living your life to maximize your cash flow? Just this weekend, I was with some very wealthy people. One is extremely wealthy in net worth, and the other guy's a high income earner. And they were just talking about the different platforms for streaming live TV. And just that, by utilizing the right strategy, you could save $2,000 a year. And this was just a simple conversation between a rich person and a high net worth or high income person. And really everybody is, how do you come up with small strategies that equal large results? And like I said, just in our household, we put in over $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year back into our household by maximizing our cash flow and always analyzing our cash flow. And with businesses, you could typically see $18,000 or more per year back into your cash flow. How do you maximize your cash flow? Well, you have to understand what is your cash flow, what's coming in, what's going out, where's it going, and what are some good strategies to maximize that cash flow. Let me share with you what our cash flow is king process looks like. So here's our 5-step process. Number 1, what gets measured gets done. This is ultimately a goal setting process, and all your goals need to be measured. Now, I'm not going to go through setting up your goals and SMART goal process. We can save that for another video, but I really want you to understand is what gets measured gets done. Everything you need to accomplish in life needs to be measured. The easiest thing is one time I was at an event, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, I want to be a better basketball player. And he was setting his goals. I said, show me a better basketball player. You can't. But what you can show me is shooting 50% from the field and 80% from the free throw line, right? You can show a measurable increase. So what gets measured gets done. And we'll take this a step further in a later slide and video about maximizing your revenue and maximizing your cash flow, because what gets measured gets done. Number 2 is start with the end in mind. When do you want to accomplish what you want to accomplish? Number 3, work backwards. So essentially you have to reverse engineer everything you want in life. If you want $1 million, you got to reverse engineer it. So $1 million, what gets measured? Start with the end in mind. When do you want it? And then you got to work backwards. So you got to break it down into bite-sized increments. And so ultimately what I say is this: if you're not accomplishing what you want to accomplish in a year, and you're measuring it every year, you got to reverse back and say, how do I measure this quarterly? If you're not hitting your goals quarterly, you got to break it down monthly. If you're not hitting your goals monthly, you got to break it down weekly. And if you're not hitting your goals weekly, you got to start breaking it down daily. And we'll explain this in a moment. Number 4 is actionable increments. Really, this is what breaks it all down. Is what are those small incremental things that you can do every day that creates discipline? See, we try to accomplish our goals, but it's really breaking it down to very small micro actions that you do every day, that you do consistently. It's just like if you want to be in shape, it's that hour a day that you need to make sure that you're working on your muscles. If you want to have more mental clarity, you got to say, how do I work on my mind for maybe an hour a day? If you want to have the financial clarity and the cash flow we're talking about, what are those actionable increments that you can put in place to maximize your cash flow? And we'll explain some of that in a moment. And then lastly is self-to-self measurement. It's the same thing as I just said, is when do you want to measure your successes? Do you want to do it on a yearly basis, quarterly basis, monthly basis, weekly basis, or daily basis? So you have to have those self-to-self measurement, which are just signposts in time, dates that you're going to go and review your cash flow is king process and your goals. So let me apply my cash flow is king process to revenue. And the reason is revenue is you think cash flow is all bottom line, but it's not true. Revenue cures all. The higher you grow your revenue, the higher you're going to grow your cash flow. If you're just thinking about cash flow, there's only so much you can do to maximize your cash flow by cutting costs. The best way to maximize your cash flow is by growing your revenue. And so revenue cures all. So let's put together the cash flow is king process to your revenue. So you remember a minute ago I was talking about revenue cures all. And so here it is. Remember I was talking about what gets measured gets done. This is about setting your goals and in a measurable way. And so number one, let's just say that you want to have $1 million in revenue in your pocket or in your business. So how do you get $1 million in revenue? Well, when do you want to accomplish that by? So start with the end in mind. So let's say in 12 months you want to have a total of $1 million in revenue. What does that look like? Well, you got to work backwards. And so that's $250,000 per quarter. That's $83,000 per month in revenue, or that's $19,230 per week in revenue. Now that's not good enough, but that's a bite-sized chunk. Sometimes when you think of $1 million, it seems so esoteric, it seems so big that when you work backwards and move it down to these bite-sized chunks, you could start thinking about, how do I start accomplishing this? You could even work backwards a little bit further. What is your average sale? How many sales is that per week? How many sales is that per month? How many sales is that per quarter? You could even break that down further to leads. And so ultimately that breaks down to your actionable increments, because you need to know is how much you need to fill your funnel, how many leads you need in your funnel, what's your closing ratio, and then you can start identifying what's my marketing funnel. How do I get a massive amount of people into this marketing funnel so I can start marketing to them and then move them over to our sales funnel? And how many people do I need in my marketing funnel at all times? And how many people do I need in my sales funnel at all times? And what does that look like? We have an 11-point strategy that are different actionable increments to maximize your marketing funnel and maximize your sales funnel and maximize your revenue. But this is all about cash flow. So we want to get you on a plan where you're starting to identify what are my goals, and then work backwards and then break those down into actionable increments of what do I need to do every day and every week, every month, and every quarter to maximize my marketing funnel, my sales funnel, but maximize my top line revenue number. And then lastly, self-to-self measurement. When do you want to measure this? Do you want to measure this lead system every day, every week, every month, every quarter, or every year? So the big thing is to get started. Get started with the process of understanding the cash flow is king revenue maximization model, because revenue cures all. Now let's turn this over to cash flow is king profits and cash flow into your pocket. So let's say what gets measured gets done. You want to put $333,000 into your pocket. So that would be start with the end in mind. When you want to do this by 12 months. Work backwards. $83,000 per quarter, $28,000 per month, and $7,000 per week that would go into your pocket. Now, what are those actionable increments to make sure you're maximizing this? What are your fixed expenses? What are your variable expenses? Are they in line? Can we lower your fixed expenses by creating more value and increasing your revenue? Can we change your variable expenses by measuring them properly? Maybe these are your marketing expenses. Are you getting value out of all your marketing? It's all about measuring and understanding the rate of return on those variable expenses so you can maximize your cash flow. And then lastly is self-to-self measurement. When do you want to measure this? Do you want to measure this on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis? And it really depends on your mindset. If you're the revenue guy or lady, you're probably not going to you're not measuring your cash flow every day. But if you're a profit person, you're probably measuring your cash flow every day and then measuring your revenue at a later time. So how do you put this in place to really maximize what you're doing so you can maximize your cash flow and maximize what you're putting into your pocket every day? Now let me show you the cash flow is king process when it relates to your profit and maximizing your cash flow. Number one, what gets measured gets done. So let's say you wanted a $333,000 cash flow to you as the owner. Number two, we're going to start with the end in mind. So let's say we want this in 12 months. So that's our target. That's our target date. Number three, you got to work backwards. So you got to reverse engineer exactly what you want to happen. So that'd be $83,000 per quarter, $28,000 per month, $7,000 per week. And then you got to break that into actionable increments. How do we get you there? Now, we already showed you that revenue cures all, but you have to look at your fixed expenses. Control your fixed expenses. How do we maximize and make sure that you're paying the least amount for all your fixed expenses and negotiate those? Number two is the variable expenses. How do we plan for the variable expenses and make sure that we're held accountable to what's coming next, and how we planning for that and putting money aside for those variable expenses so not to be surprised. Number 5 then is self-to-self measurement. When do you want to measure this cash flow is king process? You want to do it on a yearly basis. Remember, if you're not hitting your goal on a yearly basis, we got to break that down to quarterly. If you're not doing it on a quarterly basis, we want to break that down to monthly, then weekly, and then daily. So we want to make sure that you maximize your cash flow, not being redundant with the measurement, but making sure that we have different signposts to measure to make sure you're maximizing the cash flow is king process and maximizing the cash flow that's going into your pocket with a profit first mentality. Pay yourself first and then pay all your other expenses second. Let me share with you some of the successes we've had with the cash flow is king process. So the first one is a $2 million business that we started working with about 18 months ago. And when we started working with them, their books were in chaos. They had a very complicated business, not because they were making it complicated. It literally has some interesting moving parts that nobody seemed to be able to fix. And so every month, this business owner did not know how much money was in the bank account and how much money was her cash flow versus going to pay the employees and future contractors for the work being done. So let me explain the business and let me share with you the result. So the business is not necessarily unique in this way, but it had 300 transactions per month, which is a high amount of transactions. So to reconcile those and make sure those reconciled every month. Number 2 is 41 contractors were paid per month. Again, not necessarily crazy, but here's the difference. The contractors were not sending in invoices. They were actually tabulating the invoices for the contractors and then paying them based on those invoices. So they had to track 41 invoices. So the result was we had to integrate their CRM, their QuickBooks Online, and their merchant accounts to make sure this was all running smoothly and taking away a lot of the manual processes that were causing the problems. So when you have 300 transactions per month and you're tabulating 41 different invoices on those 300 transactions, you can imagine the manual processes that went into it. And so we had to integrate it through technology. Now the result was this. We uncovered $5,000 per month in free cash flow for this business and put $60,000 back into the business owner's processes, in the business owner's pocket through our cash flow is king processes. So that is how we worked with a $2 million business. Here's another client that we typically see, and here's a $1 million household. Now the ones that I'm sharing with you here are very similar. It happens to be 3 different surgeons that have a very similar situation in what we've dealt with over the last few years. And so here's a situation of $1 million household. Now that's a nice income, and what you'll find is that this is even harder sometimes to manage the cash flow because these types of folks have W-2 income, they have S-Corp income, they might have what's called K-1 income, and then third is they have some investment income. And so really these folks are working typically 10, 14 hours a day. They're doing surgery, they might be doing some consulting, and they might have some investment properties. And the biggest thing that I see is kind of managing all that. And so, typically the surgeons that we have here are making $800,000 to $1 million in W-2. They typically have what I'd call a side hustle. So they have an S-Corp where they're doing some consulting or some outside work. And then lastly, some investment income. So one of the gentlemen had $200,000 of passive income. But the problem with that passive income, he wasn't realizing the income. It was used to pay down debt. So he was paying taxes on that passive income, but it wasn't coming into his cash flow. And he was wondering where his cash flow is and why he wasn't being able to get ends to meet, so to speak. So that was one. The other one was another surgeon, and he was all right with his cash flow, but just had a huge tax bill because he was taking everyone as a straight K1, where we could possibly pay that into an S-Corp and maximize his cash flow. Another gentleman was very similar, K1, straight into his name, and so we wanted to make sure that we were shielding that from liability and some other things, and how do we pay that into an S-Corp. And so really these 3 people maximizing their investment income is because a lot of times what you don't realize is when these people are making $1 million, their kids are going to large and prestigious schools where it costs $65,000 a year nowadays. And so how do you maximize all that cash flow? So I know one gentleman with the $1 million cash flow. He was a dermatologist. We were able to put about $65,000 back into his cash flow. We're working on putting another $100,000 to $200,000 back in his cash flow by using a captive insurance company. The one surgeon that we worked with, we're looking at some solar credits to offset some of that investment income. We're looking at a couple other strategies that increase his cash flow. For him, I'm looking at about $60,000 to increase his cash flow. And so ultimately, it's really, where's your cash flow going? How do you maximize it? And what strategies can you put in place to maximize it, whether that be in your business or in your household? Because with $1 million, it seems like it might be easy, but also comes bigger problems because you want to invest more into your kids, and that can be very costly. So there are many strategies when you're running a $1 million household that might incorporate a large W-2, a large S-Corp, a large K-1, or even investment income. And so how do you put all that together to make sure you're maximizing your cash flow and putting more money back in your pocket? And the three examples ultimately I'm given is that typically here we were able to put $5,000 plus back into that household and back into that business. I want to share with you a quick story about some newlyweds that recently came into the office. They were looking to buy a second home, so they're putting their lifestyles together, trying to maximize what they're making, trying to grow into what's coming next, becoming partners in different firms, as well as they were looking at buying a second home. So as they brought in their income sheet to me on a spreadsheet, they had about $300,000 in combined income. And what they broke down was that each of them had about $2,000 to $2,500 per month that they had in variable spending. So it's $5,000. So I looked at them and I said, where's that $60,000 going? And they both looked at me a little bit puzzled. So just understanding that variable spending and that emotional spending, and not that you want to change it, but if you don't understand it, you can't make great decisions. So what we wanted to do for them is, if we can give them a pie chart, if we can put them on the software and share with them exactly where's your fixed expenditures and where your variable spending going every month, because then you can make choices. And I'm not saying you shouldn't keep spending that, do what you want, but how do you make those choices? I know when I was a bachelor, I remember one time I knew that I was wasting some money. I didn't know where my money was going. So I sat down. I remember I was in Napa and I sat down at an outdoor little garden, grabbed out my computer and realized I was spending $5,000 a month traveling, eating out, just on variable spending. Quickly, when I realized that, I started making new decisions. So that $5,000, it's not that you should or shouldn't spend it, but once you know where it's going, you can make a decision. If you don't know where it's going, you're not making a decision, you're making an unconscious decision. And so we want to be driven by conscious thought and conscious decision. And so you can understand where that money's going. For me, I was able to put $60,000 back into my pocket. And ironically, when I did that, it was July 2007. So I put $5,000 back into my pocket every month. And just a short 6 months later, when I was in the corporate world, when the market crashed, they had 40% of the people were let go, which included me. And so luckily, by that time, I had over $60,000 in my savings account because I understood where my variable spending was going. This couple also wanted to buy a second home. And the interesting about the second home is the one thing is they weren't understanding the variable spending of the second home. So they put all the fixed expenditures back, on the spreadsheet. And so I calculated about $6,000 in variable spending every year for that second home. That $6,000, if you weren't planning for it, causes stress and second guessing. So, but when you have that variable spending down on a piece of paper and that emotional spending down on a piece of paper, you can make better decisions. So I want to help you get the results that you want. Either you can go and do the cash flow is king process yourself, or you can have us do it. But here are the results that you really need to start thinking about creating, whether you do it for yourself or we do it for you. Is number one, get a hold on that emotional spending. When you know what your emotional spending is, you make better decisions. If you don't know what it is, you won't make great decisions. You'll cut down arguments with your spouse and your partners in business. Same thing with variable spending. You know it's going to happen. You know things are going to happen. So how do you handle variable spending? And it's really with a profit-first mentality. How do you put some money aside for variable spending? How do you put some money aside for when the market takes a downturn? And how do you put some money aside so you can take advantage of situations in your business or your personal life when variable situations come about? Maximize your revenue. Revenue cures all. You can use the cash flow is king process to maximize your revenue. You can use the cash flow is king to maximize your cash flow. And ultimately what we've seen is a 21% or more increase in revenue, and in cash flow, we typically put $5,000 a year or $5,000 a month or more back in your pocket. So the smaller businesses that we deal with, typically we put $5,000 or $6,000 back into their pocket every year. The larger the business, it's $5,000 a month. So it's really where you're at and what that means to you. What does $5,000 a year mean to you, and what does $5,000 a month mean to you, depending on the size of your business. That's what the Cash Flow is King process will do for you. How do you get started with the Cash Flow is King process? Number one, you're going to get the Cash Flow is King process done for you. Number two, we're going to do monthly accounting. So we'll have everything done for you. Number three, we'll provide reporting. We do this reporting on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly or quarterly basis, whatever is most pertinent to you and your business for your success. Number four, we'll do one-on-one review, again, on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or even quarterly basis, whatever is pertinent for you and your business's success. Number five, we provide accountability. This is key to get rid of that emotional spending, understand the variable spending, and eliminate and decrease your fixed spending. Number six is hit your targets. When you know where you're going and you know where you're at, it's easy to get there and to exceed them. So to get started, give us a call at 312-330-5094 or text us at 312-330-5094, or you can email me at matt@linkbizsolutions.com. The best thing to do is send us 2 times that work for you, and we'll confirm the best one that works for us, and we'll get you scheduled and get you on your way to your Cash Flow is King process.